Hi there and welcome to the channel. Today I'm gonna be showing you how I made my track Red Lipstick, which you are listening to at the moment. There's a link to it in the description in case you want to check it out. As you probably already know, this piece is 100% inspired by the light music genre, and I got the idea from the series of videos by Alex Bull, where he breaks down certain elements of this style. I highly recommend you check those out as well, because they're just gold. You can find them in the description too. So the way I tend to approach this begins with determining, of course, the genre, and then finding and importing into the session a reference track that encapsulates best the structure I like, arrangement ideas I like, general sound I like, etc. It works like an overall compass of sorts for the whole thing. For this piece, the reference track I used was High Heels by Trevor Duncan, which you can check out in the description, although I didn't use that particular recording. So once I've got that sorted, I set a general tempo and lay out the formal structure using markers, as you can see here. Then I pull out a piano and start sketching out the main melodies, harmonies, very vague arrangement ideas, etc., which is what you're listening to at the moment. This would be the equivalent of a lead sheet. Right, so after that I set out to flesh out the actual arrangement, which is what's playing now. I don't like using several piano tracks to do this because a piano cannot sustain long notes, which makes certain textures a bit too abstract for me. That's why I use three main different ensemble patches instead. One for woodwinds, one for brass, and one for strings. If I need to add an extra track for family, I just go ahead and do it, but 3 tracks tend to be enough. So the idea behind this is to put down all the voicings, counter melodies, background textures, tiny elements, etc. and assign them to an instrument family. And if there are doublings between families, I also write those down. In order to keep the arrangement simple without getting too abstract, I use a couple of articulation sets for woodwinds and brass, one for longs and one for shorts, and a few more for strings, but not many. I don't usually include percussion in the arrangement stage unless it is a percussion-driven piece. That's why there's no percussion here. Another thing is that unless the piece is very simple, I don't like using the piano roll for sketching or arranging. I find it very confusing because even if you have everything separated in different tracks, it's very hard to see right away how different elements clash in the same register, for instance. I find the score editor much clearer for this. Once that's done, I add slight tempo fluctuations to make it breathe a bit and to make it more human. The criteria here is just taste, really. If you've ever played an instrument or conducted an ensemble, you see how there are certain elements that naturally tend to get slightly rushed and others that tend to drag a bit. Now the next step is programming, no mysteries here. During this step, I basically copy and paste the MIDI data from the arrangement step and decide which instrument within each family is going to play what. If there are any doublings, and I may also add tiny elements here and there or drop them to round up the arrangement. I usually start programming the strings, then I move on to the woodwinds, then the brass, and finally I add the percussion and other things like, in this case, harp and piano. I don't tend to automate anything other than CC1 and CC11, though I do automate vibrato as well in the Spitfire libraries, but that's about it really. The main libraries I used were Berlin Woodwinds, CineBrass, CinematicStudioBrass, sample modeling the trumpet, the horn and trombone, and Tuba, CinePerc, CineHarp, Fazioli for the piano, Spitfire, Symphonic, and the chamber strings, and CineStrings solo. You can check out the full library list in the description as well. The next step is mixing, and the idea behind it is to enhance the performance of the ensemble. I like to look at it as conducting the piece rather than mixing it. When you are conducting an orchestra, one of the things you do is help the players draw the lines they are playing, outline certain bits and taper off others, basically controlling when and how to go louder and when and how to go softer. Another thing to do is balance the ensemble by making sure that the melody the violas might be carrying isn't being buried under the counter melody of the horns. That is not that important at the moment, for instance. Now, you'd say that both things are addressed when programming the CC automation, and even more if your template is pre-mixed, which is true, but here I try to enhance that effect. So what you can see here is just that applied to each of the buses, each group of instruments and their articulations is routed to. Once that's done, I tweak the EQ that's already built in the template. I also sort out certain things like tonal imbalances of certain instruments like flutes when they go high, or inconsistencies due to phasing like rumbling double basses, etc. I don't usually touch the parallel compression, but if I did, I would do it at this stage. And finally, I add the reverb. I use mainly two reverbs, one for the early reflections and another to handle the tail, so nothing new here. I add an extra send to the brass before those two because they are particularly dry compared to the rest of the orchestra. Finally, when it comes to mastering, I like to break it down into two steps. In the first one, I split the signal into mid and side. I apply a bit of compression, some EQ, a bit more compression, a bit of expansion, and a bit of limiting to both mid and side. The amount of processing made by any of those instances is minimal, barely a dB or even less, but they add up. And since they are having different effects on the mid and on the side, that helps enhance the stereo perception without losing focus. In short, the mid gets a bit more compressed and limited, whereas the highs on the side get a bit boosted and the lows of the side a bit dimmed. Finally, both mid and side are routed to a master bus where I apply a slight corrective EQ, a bit of additive EQ, a tiny bit of stereo enhancement with wider, and with a mid-side EQ where I boost a bit of the high frequencies on the side and make the lows progressively mono, and finally 2 instances of limiting, barely doing anything at all. So that's about it. Please let me know in the comments if you've got any questions or if you like this kind of content. All the best everyone, and cheers.